Okay, so let's open up NetBeans. And what we're going to do is we're going to use our dice class that we've made. But this time we're going to do it in a graphical user interface rather than just a command line interface. So that's not something we've talked about yet. But I want to show you how kind of real programming works in the real world. Typically, it's not all command line programming. So let's start with that. Our current dice simulator looks like this. You know, we just create dice and then we print out the sum of all the dice, I think we did. Yeah. So we say go, and then we get a little output window. And this is what they'd see on the command line. We roll a single dice, we get 3. We roll a 5 dice, we get 18 or 17. Okay. But now we want to create a graphical version of this program. So we go into our package, and we're going to add something new that we haven't added before. I think what the best way to do this would be. Yeah, let's try this JPanel form. No, we want to do a JFrame. JFrame form, this one here. And we're going to call it we'll call it the dice frame, I guess. So you may have already created a frame object, but creating things programmatically, especially graphical user interfaces, is really tedious and cumbersome because you kind of have to imagine everything in your head and then you try to write down in code how that works. It'd be nice if we could use a UI generator. And there's one built into NetBeans, and I kind of like this one actually. So just say finish here. And it creates a nice little window for you here. And then you have over here on the right side a list of all the different user interface controls you can put on this blank window. It's just like a frame. If you look in the source code, you'll notice that a lot of stuff gets done for you. There's also a lot of hidden stuff that here it creates a Java frame that is a child of javax.swing.jframe. It creates a constructor for you, calls initialize components, and then here is the main method that's run when you when you say run here on the JFrame. But if you look under here, there's a bunch of code that's hidden from you, and this is code that you shouldn't ever change directly. Okay. And this says initialize components, and there's all this code in here that's really hard to understand. And so what they do is, I call this just plumbing or boilerplate code. Code that you need to have, but it's actually created by the NetBeans itself. And that will get populated as we drag controls onto the form. That'll get populated with all the background code for us automatically. So what I'd like to do here is to create a set of buttons. We want 5 buttons, 1 for each die, and then 1 button to actually roll the die. Okay? Just like this is what I've had in my head so far. It'd be nice if the buttons were square, so we're going to make them square. Here's a button. We'll drag that on. All you do is just click and drag it. It has these nice things that keep it separate. We'd like to make it the same size or squarish. So I'm thinking around there. I've got a selection. A lot of times they show you over here the properties for the button. Look at all these different properties. And I'm trying to find the one that says size. So I do want this to be perfectly square. margin. Never clear to me where that exact size is. Probably buried somewhere. But that? Yeah. J-frame properties? Okay, down here, J-frame. Oh, I haven't selected the button, so there. So I select the button, say down here on the bottom. Up. There's the preferred size, but that's not square. Yeah, still it's 73 by 23. Yeah, because usually there's a horizontal and a vertical maximum, but I'll have to dig that out. Yeah. Where is it located? Towards the bottom. And it says here vertical size. Oh, I see. Yeah. So instead of default, we want to say, what was the other one? And we'll just make it 100. And here we'll make this 100 as well. It's kind of big. Yeah, so let's crank it back just a little bit. We'll say something that's easily divisible.
75.
Let's try 80. I'll get the point across. Okay, so there's our button. Did it change it to default or 80? 80. Does that look square? I guess it is. Okay, so there's our first button. We're going to create the J-frame. I just right-clicked on the package here. I said new. Oh, that. Okay, so you go here, and we figured out that if we go down here to horizontal size under layout, we set it to 80 and the vertical size to 80. So you have to select the button first. Oh, you don't have the properties window? Yeah. Let's see. Properties, pin it. Oh. Now you got it. All right. So next thing we want to do is just duplicate this button. And I think it'll automatically number it for us. So here's button 1. I do Control C and then Control V, and it creates a new one for you. I actually want to stack them up pretty tight, so I'll do that. Stretch out my window a little bit. Okay, so now we have our 5 buttons, and on these buttons, that's what we're going to put the picture of the dice eventually. We'll also have a button on the bottom, and this will be a roll button. I'm just going to grab it because I don't want that to be square. We'll put it right under there. Maybe a little taller. Okay. And that's basically what our user interface is going to be. That looks pretty good. So now what we want to do is take a look at these button names and see what they're actually called. So the name, here's the label. I'm looking for the actual name of it. Yeah, it might be that, but I think that's for screen readers. I'm just looking for the actual name. No, the text is, let's see, sometimes it's under here. No, code. Yeah, variable name, JButton1. And then this one, even though it says JButton1, it's JButton2. Okay, so what I would do is I would select the button. We just want to clear the text that's on the button. So that would be the label. I would clear both of these. I cleared JButton, that one there. And it automatically changes the accessible name too. So just go in each one of these and delete the text that's on it. Okay, I'll show you. So all I'm doing is just going through and deleting the text. Okay. But this one we do want it to say something. So we change the text to roll. And that's going to roll the dice. Okay, so we have our buttons. Now we have to figure out, well, how do I get the numbers on the buttons to create this roll array? So we're going to add an event for the roll button, and this is what's going to generate the new numbers. So how do you create an event handler in Java? And the answer is you just double click on the button you want to create an event for. And it gives us a button event, and this will get called, this code will get called whenever the user actually hits the button. If you look at the generated code, look how complicated it is so far. You can see the buttons being added and all that stuff. Be glad you don't have to write that code. Again, the IDE is writing that code for you. Should you ever go in there and edit that code yourself? And the answer is really no. Because you really have to know what you're doing to do that, and even I won't venture in there. Because as soon as you change something, it gets overwritten the next time you do the user interface. So it's not a place that you should put code that you don't want to have overwritten, I guess. Okay, so what do we need to do? Well, we need to generate some new numbers, but the problem is we haven't actually added a dice array to our form yet, right? So we're inside our J frame, our dice frame, and here we are in initialized components. You can treat initialized components a lot like a constructor. So we're going to do that. We're going to do that here. So down here at the bottom, we're going to put some instance variables. And the one we want to put in is the dice array. So we'll say private. So the dice class, and we say my dice equals new dice. And then we'll pass in the number of size we want. Well, we already know the number of signs we want. We want 5, right? But if we put 5 there and later change our mind and put 6, then we'll have to remember and go and change that. But remember, you never want magic numbers in your Java code. Not liking that. I wonder. So if we look at the constructor for dice, oh, I guess we don't pass the num. We got to do num dice and num sides. Okay. So we're going to create two constants. What was that? Yeah, I see that. But I'm also missing a parameter. Okay. So we could say, okay, number of dice and number of sides. And then it will allow you to actually create the set of dice. But we don't want to use magic numbers. When you're coding, you should never put in a literal number, just rarely. You should actually create constants. Now these are going to be private constants. So, well, we can make them public. Public, we might need them outside. Static, final. And this time we're going to capitalize it with words separated by underscore. So with constants, you always want to use uppercase letters. And we're going to set that to 5. And it's complaining. I'm not sure why. Okay, so we need a data type. So it's a little bit long. Public static final int. Finally, the name of the constant and the number of sides. So that's plural. And we'll set that to 6. So don't get those two confused. In this game, it actually confuses a lot of things if you do that. So now here, where we actually set up our dice array, we're going to say num dice. And we're just using the constant we created, num sides. Okay, so we have to be careful here because num sides and num dice have the same data type. They're both integers. And again, if they're both integers, it's really easy to get them in the wrong order. So you want to make sure you go to your dice class and double check to see if it's num dice and num sides. Because if you get them backwards, you're not going to notice that, and everything's going to be kind of messed up. So num dice first, and then num sides second. Num dice first and num sides second. Yeah, so we did do that accurately. Now, notice how we're initializing this outside of the constructor for the J-frame. This is probably not the best spot to do this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a semicolon here. We'll just declare that we're going to have this dice, but we're not going to allocate it yet. And we're going to take this part and we're going to move it up to the constructor. Here's the constructor. So anytime that there's a dice frame created, it's going to allocate that for the dice. So typically, outside in your class, you don't want any code that's going to execute. And I'm surprised that it actually let us do that the first time. But we'd rather create this set of dice each time there's another dice frame that gets created. Who's to say you're not going to create a game with multiple sets of dice? Okay. So you don't want to put it out at the class level. You want to put it actually in the constructor. Now, when you put it in there, you don't need the data type for that. What was that? Yeah, I cut and pasted it. So what I did down here is all I'm doing is saying, here's the instance variable. It's called my dice. It doesn't exist yet. I haven't allocated any memory for it. It's not in the memory of the computer. I'm just telling the computer, okay, there's going to be a set of dice here. I don't know how big yet. So you do that. Private dice is the data type, my dice. And so now you don't have to say, dice right here, because it already knows that it's a dice class object. And so we set my dice equal to what comes back from the constructor of the dice. So this is what actually makes the dice. And we want the dice to be made right when the frame is created. Now what's cool about this is now that we have the set of dice in our frame, we can use it, we can call any method that we want on the dice frame. And so we could say, when they hit the roll button now, here's the roll button. We'll change the name in a second. But so we say my dice dot roll. I think that's the way we set it. And that's going to roll all 5 dice. So we created this one class that was for a text program, and now we're completely changing the user interface. Okay? And it still works, or it should still work in this new environment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say J button 1 dot text, right? And we're going to set that equal to my dice dot, and here's all our methods for the dice class that sees them all out there. And we can say get die value, and we pass in the die number, and we're going to start with 0. Remember, in your programming, you typically number things starting at 0. It's not called J button 1. What's it called? J button. Oh, it's a lowercase j. This returns an integer, and we want to turn it into a string. So what I typically do, just to make it simple, is I put an open and close quotes, just an empty string, and then I use the concatenation operator, and that will convert it. Here it's saying it doesn't have a text, so maybe it's a set function. Camera dot set, and we're looking for set text. Yeah, there it is. So it's a set function, so we don't use the equal sign, we just wrap what we want to set it to in parentheses. So it looks something like that. So in English, what are we doing? We're rolling the dice, and then we're going to set the text of the first button equal to the result we got back from the roll. So I'm going to roll that, I'm going to run it here. And I'm going to click on the roll button. It gives me the number 3. So it's a little bit convoluted setting up the user interface, but what's nice about this is we're able to use our dice class just like before, and now we have a really nice interface for the user to use. We're only doing the first one, and we want to do all of them. So this is a great place to do this in an array. Now we know that there's an array inside of our dice class, but there's no way for us to access it directly. But we can create a loop and still do it. So we only have to have one line of code. The first problem, though, is we don't have our buttons in an array yet that we can access it. So what I would do is we're going to create that array of buttons. See down here we have all these variables. It says do not modify. This isn't very helpful because we want to access these buttons inside of an array. So we're going to do that next. We're going to say private JButton, and it's going to be an array of JButtons. And we're going to call it RollButtons. Okay. Now, it's complaining because public class JButton. Here it is. Notice how that when they put that in, they say Java x.swing.jbutton. So they're trying to avoid the import up here. So why don't we do that just to be consistent? We have to put the full name. Yeah, if you want to avoid imports, you can always just type in the full path or the full, I guess it's the package name that you want. Notice I haven't specified a size yet. But what this array is going to hold is all the JButtons in one array, and then we can process the JButtons inside of a loop instead of doing it one at a time. Yeah, it's fine. So up here in the constructor, and this is kind of clunky. We have to assign each JButton to a spot in our array. So we'd say RollButtons equals new JButton and this is what we want numDice to come in here. Okay, so up here in the constructor, we're going to say we're going to have this array called RollButtons, and I'm getting tired of typing that in, so I'm going to just say so we'll import that. Evidently it has to come out of come after the package name, so we'll put it here. Well, just a sec. Now that we're importing them, I would take off the stuff at the start. So we want to import, after the package name, import javax.swing.jbutton. So now that we have the array of RollButtons, we need to attach then each of the individual RollButtons to our array so that we can process them in the loop. Unfortunately, when you set this up, you can't do it in a loop. The whole point of doing this is so we can process it later in a loop. But you kind of have to do it one by one here. So you would say RollButtons, and the first element in the loop would be 0. Equals, and this is where you put the name of your JButton. So in this case, it was JButton J button 1. And you want to do this 5 more times. Now, if you didn't put your buttons in the correct order, you're going to have to, you want these to be in the right order. So that's the second one, there's the third one, the fourth one, and the fifth one. And then if you did them in the order I did, this would be J button 1, 2, and 3. Now from this point forward, we can refer to these buttons using our array, and we don't have to use their actual names anymore. We can just use the roll button and the number to specify the die we want to get the value from. Again, so the whole point here is to allow us to access our buttons in our user interface using an array so we can process them in a loop. So now that we have this array, this new array of roll buttons, then down here in the roll event, instead of doing it this way, we can do this in a loop. So we roll our dice, and we can say this, for int I equals 0, I less than num dice. So start at 0, keep looping until it reaches num dice, and then at the bottom we say I plus plus. Oh, don't put a semicolon. Put an open curly brace. And wrap the code that we wrote with that. Now to set the text for the button, we don't want to just do J button once. We want to do all the buttons. So we would say, or I guess we call it button array, or roll buttons, I guess it was called. Roll buttons. And here we're going to say I. The first time through, that will be button number 0. And then we say set text. And then here also, to get the die value, we would change that to I, to a variable. And now what this will do, instead of just doing the first one, it's going to do all 5 of them, one at a time. You go in the roll button array, you index in based on whatever I is equal to. The first time it's going to be 0. Set the text, and go get that die value. Comes around the second time through the loop. Now I is going to be equal to 1. So it'll go to roll button sub 1, which is the second one, and set the text to whatever was rolled for the second die. And it'll do that 5 times. So if we run it, our hope is that it will generate all the numbers, not just the first one. So here my text is empty. Say roll, and I have all 5. Now eventually we're going to make these pictures, but for now we can see that our rolling mechanism should be working. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'll try to get all this code on the screen, so let me just do some editing. It's going to be pretty squashed, but I just want to make sure that you can see all the code that you need to change. Okay. Okay, so here's the constructor of the J-frame. We create an array of buttons, and then we assign each of the buttons in our user interface to a slot in our roll button array. And then we also create a set of dice that we use in our game. So make sure that happens right after init components in the dice frame. And then down here, we want to actually put in what happens when they roll the dice or hit the roll button. Now I want to change the name of that button, so I lost my property window. I guess it's over here. So I want to change the name of this button just to roll button. You'd figure they put the name on the top, but they don't. I think it's under code. Here's the name of the button, and we're going to call it just call it J-button roll, because 6 doesn't really imply anything to me. That doesn't seem to work. If we go back to our code now, let's see if it automatically updated it. Yeah, it did. J-button roll. That's just a little bit more meaningful than J-button 6, or whatever number you had. That way we see, oh, that's the roll button. So the roll button is actually doing this. Let's see if it still works. Now we say roll. Yeah, it still works.